The Threshold. The Galactic Council chamber was a monument to age and power, designed to humble. Its walls were woven from solidified light, a tapestry of captured starlight that shifted in slow, imperceptible patterns, displaying the birth and death of galaxies over millennia. The air, recycled for eons, hummed with the silent thrum of technologies that defied human comprehension. Gravity anchors that held the station in a pocket of placid space-time. Temporal stabilizers that smoothed out relativistic distortions, and probability buffers that ensured no stray quantum event could disrupt the proceedings. Seated in the lowest, most shadowed tier was Ambassador Kenji Tanaka, representing the Soul Federation, humanity. His chair, a standard-issue suspension field, felt alien and unstable beneath him, subtly correcting for movements he hadn't yet made. We were the youngest species to ever be granted a seat, a provisional acknowledgement born more of galactic curiosity than respect. Our ships still burned refined hydrocarbons to breach orbit, a process the elder races viewed with the same quaint fascination as an animal learning to use a tool for the first time. Our understanding of hyperspace was rudimentary, borrowed from publicly available VEX schematics that were centuries out of date. We were infants in a room of ageless titans, and the chamber's very architecture was designed to remind us of it. Every glance from the chitinous Cathar, whose exoskeleton was a living gem-encrusted record of his lineage's conquests, or the crystalline Lumini, whose thoughts refracted through their bodies like light through a prism, felt like a dismissal. We were a footnote, a brief, noisy chapter in a galactic history that spanned eons. Our only offering was our boundless, almost naive eagerness to learn, a trait the elder races, secure in their mastery, seemed to have long forgotten. The Chamber of Whispers was never overt. The elder races were far too sophisticated for direct insults. It was in the slow, deliberate way the Vex delegate, a being of pure logic encased in polished chrome, translated simple concepts like economic exchange into patronizingly basic terms, as if explaining currency to a child. It was in the ripple of silent telepathic amusement that spread through the chamber when Ambassador Tanaka, with earnest pride, spoke of Earth's modest fleet capabilities. He could feel the amusement, not as a thought, but as a pressure, a sudden shared sense of cosmic irony from a dozen powerful minds at once. Our technology was a joke, a collection of quaint, noisy contraptions that spat fire and metal to achieve what their ships did with a thought. They commanded fleets that could darken stars and weapons that could fracture planets by manipulating causality itself. They had mastered gravity, time, and the fundamental forces of the cosmos. We had mastered the art of the controlled explosion. We were not seen as a threat or even as peers. We were a novelty, a pet project for the galactic community to observe with detached interest, like watching a new species of insect discover how to build a particularly ambitious mound. At one point, seeking common ground, Tanaka presented a recording of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. The Lumeni delegate listened politely, its crystalline structure vibrating softly, before remarking that the chaotic sound waves were an interesting expression of nascent, unordered consciousness. The meaning was clear. It was noise, not art, the passionate, messy scream of a lesser being. The unveiling.
It was during the triannual Synodic Conclave, a forum typically reserved for galactic-scale threats and trade disputes, that we made our first real impression. Not with the ship, not with a weapon, but with a single human woman. Dr. Amelia Verne was unassuming, with graying hair tied back in a simple knot, and eyes that seemed to hold the quiet, patient depth of a star chart. The Council was expecting a military attaché to present a request for defense technology against pirates. Instead, this small, soft-spoken academic walked to the central dais. She was a lone, organic figure of soft lines and fragile biology, dwarfed by the holographic displays and the towering, inorganic or ethereal forms of the alien delegates. She wasn't a politician or a soldier. She was a theoretical mathematician from a university they had never heard of, on a planet they considered a backwater. She had come not to ask for aid or technology, but to present a discovery. She called it with a simple, academic grace that bordered on breathtaking audacity, the equation of humanity. The chamber listened with polite indifference, a profound silence that felt heavier and more dismissive than any sound could ever be. The silence of adults waiting for a child to finish telling a fanciful story. The calculus of consciousness. Verne's voice was steady, calm, and carried a weight that belied her frail appearance. Her theory was not about physics in the way the Council understood it, a set of external rules to be mastered. It was about the interaction between the observer and the observed, taken to its absolute, terrifying extreme. She proposed that the universe wasn't just a set of immutable laws, but a living mathematical construct, a grand, unfolding equation whose solution was existence itself. And like any equation, it could be influenced by its variables. Consciousness, she explained, her gaze sweeping across the alien faces, none of which registered comprehension, is not a byproduct of existence. It is a fundamental variable. A sufficiently advanced and focused consciousness, guided by the correct mathematical framework, does not merely observe reality, it defines it. She claimed that physical law was a consensus, an average agreed upon by the passive observation of trillions of minds over billions of years. It was a habit the universe had fallen into. Humanity, she proposed, with its unique blend of chaotic emotion, rigorous logic, and relentless imagination, had discovered the language to dissent. As she spoke, a single mote of dust, illuminated by the dais light, subtly altered its random, floating trajectory, moving in a perfect, impossible spiral for a brief moment. Only Verne noticed. It was her first, tiny, successful experiment on a galactic stage, a secret confirmation whispered between her and the cosmos. The Stone of Scorn. The reaction began as a low murmur of confused telepathic chatter and escalated into open dismissal. Pause. The vexed delegate, its metallic shell clicking with mechanical irritation, was the first to speak. It labeled her theory dangerous pseudoscience, a philosophical fantasy born of a primitive species' desire for significance. Pause. It even cited historical precedents of lesser species who, upon discovering quantum mechanics, descended into solipsistic madness and annihilated themselves, unable to reconcile the observer effect with a stable reality. Pause. The Lumini ambassador, its crystalline form shimmering with what could only be described as condescending laughter, called it metaphysical poetry, a charming but ultimately meaningless byproduct of an emotional, illogical species. Pause. To them, power was tangible, fleets, energy, territorial control. The idea that a thought, a string of abstract symbols, could have more force than a dreadnought was the height of absurdity. Pause. Dr. Verne's theory was rejected, her presentation archived under the official galactic designation of minor species mythology. Pause. She returned to Earth not in disgrace, but in a profound, unshakable silence, leaving the galactic stage as quietly as she had entered it. Pause. The galaxy, confident in its ancient understanding of the universe, moved on without a second thought. Long pause. The silent void. 6 standard months later, the Cathar Dominion lost contact with its third Grand Armada. Pause. On the bridge of the flagship Conqueror's Wrath, Supreme Commander Vorlag was overseeing a routine patrol of the Cygnus trade route. Pause. His fleet was the pride of the Dominion, over 1,000 warships whose combined firepower could sterilize a solar system in hours. Pause. It was not a battle. There were no distress calls, no energy signatures of weapons fire, no wreckage. One moment, Vorlag was sipping a nutrient paste, observing the star charts. The next, his senses registered a flicker, a feeling not of impact or energy, but of subtraction, a fundamental wrongness. Pause. The void where his fleet had been was unearthingly silent, empty of even the background radiation one would expect from active reactors. It was a complete, instantaneous, and inexplicable absence. Pause. The Cathar, a proud and brutal warrior race, whose entire culture was built on glorious combat, were stunned into a rare state of utter confusion. Pause. Fleets did not vanish. They were destroyed in blazes of glory. This was something else entirely. This was an insult to the very nature of conflict. Impossible folds. The galaxy's most advanced scientific corps were dispatched to the Cygnus sector. What they found terrified them more than any wreckage or radiation signature could have. The fabric of space-time in that region was wrong. It was fundamentally, geometrically impossible. Their sensors, designed to map the cosmos with unerring precision, returned data that their computers rejected as paradoxical. They detected 4-dimensional constructs intersecting with 3-dimensional space, creating non-Euclidean angles that could not exist. A senior VEX analyst, a being of pure logic, suffered a processing cascade and had to be shut down after its report described the phenomenon with uncharacteristic panic. Reality has been folded in on itself, as if it were a piece of paper creased along the elegant, undeniable lines of a mathematical proof. It was elegant, precise, and utterly impossible. It was the universe behaving in a way it was never meant to, obeying a logic that was alien to its own laws. The silent observers. A footnote in the VEX investigation logs, almost overlooked, noted the presence of a lone human science vessel, the Curiosity, which had been on a long-range astronomical survey in a neighboring sector at the time of the fleet's disappearance. Its logs were meticulously reviewed. They were filled with mundane entries, stellar cartography, nebula gas composition analysis, crew complaints about the food synthesizers. It had registered no anomalies, no energy spikes, and its crew reported nothing unusual. Its ship itself was primitive, barely capable of sustained faster-than-light travel. Its proximity was dismissed as a 1 in a billion statistical improbability. The idea that this tiny archaic vessel, whose primary computer had less processing power than a Cathar toaster, could have anything to do with the vanishing of the Dominion's most powerful armada was so ludicrous it wasn't even formally considered. On board the Curiosity, the science team celebrated a successful survey with reconstituted ice cream, completely unaware of the cosmic horror they had just passed by.
A question of innocence. Still, galactic protocols, ancient and unbending, had to be followed. The Galactic Council formally questioned Ambassador Tanaka in a closed session. He expressed humanity's profound shock and offered any assistance their meager resources could provide. His denial was flawless, his concern utterly genuine. The Cathar representative, a towering warrior named Grohl, stared down from his immense height, his multifaceted eyes running advanced biosympathetic scans designed to detect falsehoods on a quantum level. The scans registered perfect truth. Tanaka was not lying. He genuinely believed humanity was innocent. This fact was more terrifying to Grohl than any lie could have been. What if the humans themselves didn't know what they were capable of? What if their power was so new, so profound, that it could be wielded unconsciously? A stray thought from a dreaming mind capable of unmaking a fleet. For the first time, the dismissal of humanity was tinged with a sliver of primal existential doubt. The whispers of creation. The anomalies began to spread, like ripples from an unseen stone dropped into the pond of reality. On Xylos, a barren, irradiated world forgotten for millennia, a long-dead survey drone reactivated. Its sensors watched, dumbfounded, as atmospheric processors of unknown origin began to hum, weaving a new breathable atmosphere from the toxic sludge. In the Serpent's Coil Nebula, a perfectly stable, self-sustaining wormhole opened, linking two galactic arms and cutting travel time by centuries, a feat the combined engineering knowledge of the elder races had deemed impossible. Gravity itself became erratic in isolated systems, with planets momentarily shifting their orbits in patterns that seemed less like physics and more like thought. These were not acts of destruction, but of impossible, beautiful, terrifying creation. Each event was a whisper of a power the galaxy had never known, a power that did not conquer, but simply rewrote. The pattern was undeniable. Each anomaly occurred in a sector that had been recently surveyed or merely passed through by a human vessel. The coincidence was too great, the implications too vast. The council reconvened, the atmosphere no longer one of condescension, but of thick, palpable fear. Delegates who had once mocked humanity now refused to be seated near Ambassador Tanaka, as if his very presence was a contagion. The Cathar ambassador, foregoing all diplomatic pretense, slammed a massive claw on his console, cracking the crystalline surface. "Their mythology is real," he roared. "They have a weapon that unmakes reality." He demanded that humanity surrender all data related to Dr. Verne's equation of humanity. This was no longer a request. It was a command backed by the combined, terrified might of every elder race.
They didn't want to understand the science anymore. They wanted the weapon. The new scripture. Humanity's response came not from Ambassador Tanaka, but directly from Earth. A simple, audio-only message broadcast on all diplomatic channels with no encryption. It was Dr. Verne's voice, as calm and steady as it had been on the dais. We will not be sharing our research. What we have discovered is not a weapon to be wielded. It is a fundamental truth of existence to be understood. We are not the authors of this truth, merely its first students. We have simply learned how to write reality. The message ended. There was no negotiation, no apology, no explanation. On Earth, in vast, silent calculation centers, millions of human minds were linked, their collective consciousness focused into a coherent stream of logic, providing the processing power for Verne's equations. They were not building a weapon. They were composing a new law of physics. The broadcast was just a simple statement of fact that sounded to the galaxy like the declaration of a new god. The genesis of fear. Dr. Verne's statement was an admission of guilt and a declaration of unimaginable, incomprehensible power. How do you fight a species that can rewrite the laws of physics? How do you bomb an idea? The elder races, whose power was built on fleets and armies, were confronted with a force they could not even define, let alone counter. Fear, raw and primal, spread through the galactic networks. Economic systems collapsed as trade routes near human-surveyed space were abandoned. Ancient alliances crumbled under the weight of paranoia. Any human ship, no matter how small or antiquated, was now seen as a harbinger of impossible change, a tool that could unmake reality. The species that had been a galactic joke was now a source of cosmic dread. The time for talk was over, because the elder races no longer knew what language to speak. The Coalition of Giants. A coalition was formed, the largest military alliance in galactic history. The Cathar, the Vex, the Lumini, and a dozen other elder races, setting aside eons of rivalry, united their fleets. Their purpose was clear and desperate. They would travel to the Sol system, establish a crushing blockade around the human homeworld, and extract this new science by force, even if it meant dismantling Earth piece by piece. It was a force that could crack open a star, a fleet so powerful its very presence warped the space around it, causing microfractures in local reality. They gathered their dreadnoughts and their planet killers, confident in the ancient, proven logic that overwhelming force was the solution to any problem. They traveled to Earth to put the upstart children back in their place, to restore the comfortable, predictable reality they had always known. The unseen weapon. The Coalition fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system, a glittering, terrifying armada of death and power. They were met with nothing, no human fleet, no defense platforms, no defiant hails, just silence. Scans revealed the planets orbiting their star as normal, their biosphere humming with life. But deep space sensors picked up a strange, pervasive broadcast emanating from Earth and its colonies on Mars and Luna. It wasn't energy, It wasn't radiation. It was pure data. A cascade of impossibly complex mathematical equations streaming out into the void like a silent, invisible song. The Coalition's battle computers tried to analyze it. Most crashed. The few that survived returned a single chilling analysis. The broadcast was not a communication, it was a function, actively defining the parameters of the space it occupied. The fleet commanders hesitated, a cold, alien dread creeping into their minds. This was not the response of a species preparing for war. This was the response of a god checking its work. The Great Deletion. The Cthar commander, his patience shredded by the unnerving silence, gave the order to fire a warning shot. "Obliterate their moon," he growled. A wave of plasma torpedoes, each capable of incinerating a continent, launched from the lead dreadnought. But they never arrived. As the first volley of weapons crossed the orbital path of Neptune, something happened. The Vex sensor operator did not register an impact, or a shield, or an interception. It registered a null event. The torpedoes and the massive dreadnought that fired them simply ceased to exist. They didn't explode, they didn't vanish in a flash of light. They were edited out of existence. One moment they were there, a fact of reality. The next, their existence had been rendered a statistical impossibility. The equations from Earth had not destroyed them, they had solved them and found the answer to be zero. The final theorem. Then her face appeared. On every view screen, on every bridge of every ship in the Coalition fleet, the calm, thoughtful face of Dr. Amelia Verne materialized. She wasn't in a command center. She seemed to be in a quiet study, a simple room filled with books and a steaming cup of tea. Her voice filled the silence, not with triumph, but with a profound, almost sad sense of finality. The tone of a teacher explaining a difficult lesson to a student who cannot understand. For eons, you have measured power in force and matter. You built bigger ships, stronger shields. You never understood. Mathematics is not an invention. It is a discovery. It is the language of the universe. We did not seek this power. We only sought to understand. The tragedy is that to understand something completely is to have power over it. And we discovered, she said, her eyes meeting theirs across the void, a gaze that felt both intimate and infinitely distant, that you can be solved. The unsolvable silence. The broadcast ended. The equations streaming from Earth ceased. The laws of physics in the Sol system stabilized, becoming comfortingly, terrifyingly normal again. The remaining ships of the Coalition fleet floated in the darkness, their crews paralyzed by a horror beyond their comprehension. They had brought the greatest military force in history to conquer a primitive world, and they had been defeated by a theorem. On the journey home, a new madness took root. Crews were haunted not by trauma, but by a concept. Commanders would stare at star charts for days, trying to find the flaw in the logic, until their minds broke. The Vex dismantled their own logic centers, unable to reconcile a universe where proof was a weapon. The Cathar warriors, stripped of a glorious death, fell into a deep cultural depression. They slowly, silently, turned their ships around and began the long journey home, leaving the Sol system to its impenetrable quiet. The galaxy had never been more silent.
The Echo of Gods. In the years that followed, humanity withdrew. They did not conquer. They did not expand. They simply remained in their home system, a silent, watching presence. The galaxy whispered about them. Alien theologians wrote texts debating whether humanity had achieved godhood or simply become a new, unknowable law of nature. Scientists tried desperately to replicate Verne's work, but failed. They could copy the math, but they lacked the one crucial chaotic variable, the unique, paradoxical, and endlessly creative spark of human consciousness. The most popular theory, and the most frightening, was that humanity had not just learned the language of the universe. They had become a part of its grammar, a new fundamental constant in the grand equation of everything. Expeditions sent to the edge of the Sol system would turn back, their crews reporting no barrier, but a sudden, overwhelming, and inexplicable sense that they were simply not part of the current problem being solved. The understanding. Humanity never spoke to the Council again. They had no need to. Their silence was more profound than any speech. They had shown the galaxy that a ship is temporary, an empire is fleeting, but an idea, a true idea, is eternal, woven into the fabric of what is real. Power was not in the fist, but in the mind that guided it. The elder races, humbled and terrified, left humanity to their silent star, an enigma they would never solve, a lesson they would never forget. They had come to humanity bearing threats and scorn, expecting to find a child playing with fire. Instead, they found a teacher explaining the nature of the flame. What humanity had unleashed was not a weapon. It was the next stage of evolution, a new depth of comprehension, a truth that had been waiting patiently in the numbers all along. They called it magic. We called it understanding.